What lies beyond everyday reality? What lies beyond the surface when you bloom beyond the surface and dive deeper into the depths of this experience? What is it like to experience mystical phenomena? And what defines a mystical experience anyways? This is what we'll explore together right now. And I am so glad that you're here. Thank you for your presence and for your dedicated attention to this. I really pray that this could give you some clarity on maybe some of your own experiences that you might have had that have been ineffable, beyond words to describe. And I also pray that those who might not have had any considerable mystical experiences can still stay curious, that you'd stay curious to hear that there are such experiences that can be experienced. I want to start off with a little seed that says, draw near to God and He will draw near to you. There's this sense of intimacy there, right? Into me you see. When you draw near to see into God, He will draw near to see into you. And I feel like intimacy is a central theme in the exploration of spiritual and mystical experience. When you dive deeper beyond what you can see with your mere eyes and hear with your mere ears, that there might be another layer there, or several layers, or indefinite amount of layers there to explore, and that there might be a reason for that. It really sets the stage, I feel like, this seed for discussing how personal encounters with the divine can be enormously powerful and can be transformative and lead to transformative shifts in life. And I feel like it also can foster a deeper understanding of spirituality that transcends mere belief even, right? So what are we going to explore? First, I'll explain the most important points in the Jungian approach to religious psychology, including ego versus self, the conscious versus the unconscious, the collective unconscious, individuation, symbols, and archetypes. These are terms that could be very useful to know to be able to look at mystical experiences through the lens of psychology. And then we're going to describe something called revelatory experiences. In the last book of the Bible, it's called Revelation, revelatory experiences. So we'll describe what that is and how this can be an expression both of psychopathology and a form of transformative intuitive insight that reveals truth. And then lastly, I'll go into describing the various aspects of, or that's related to, experiences of synchronicity, okay? And how synchronicity can be explained and how it relates to Jung's theories. Because synchronicity is a term that was coined by Carl Jung. And we want to discern what that is so that we can better navigate those types of experiences, those types of synchronicities, and be able to see that that might be part of the spiritual journey, but might not be the end-all be-all, okay? So, just landing here. I'm so glad you're here. Let's dive into this together. Grab yourself something to drink, some tea, some cacao, some coffee, whatever is your preference. And I've got my tea here. We'll start off with explaining the most important points in the Jungian approach. and go through these different terms, okay? So first, ego versus self. What is the ego? What is the self? What differentiates these two? The ego is the center of consciousness, and it's representing our sense of I am, okay? And navigating daily life, we need the sense of ego, okay, in this reality. To fully kind of dismantle the ego would cause a kind of psychosis, because the unconscious would take over one's entire being, and one would basically essentially dissolve into the beyond. So we have the ego for a reason, and we can act from our, let's say, conscious ego or the unconscious ego in a sense. And however, this ego is limited to conscious thought and to conscious awareness. So there's only so much that we can do with our ego, all right? There's only so much that we can see in this reality, here in this reality, experience in this reality with our ego. And what is then the self? So the self is central in Carl Jung's framework, and it represents the unity of, or the totality rather, of the psyche, including both the conscious and the unconscious aspects, and it transcends the ego, and it symbolizes the individual's potential for unity with the beyond and wholeness overall. So you have the conscious mind, which is just a few percent of our mind, okay? 5%, 3%. Then we have the unconscious aspects of our minds that is where we store really our memories, our our habits and the way of being. A lot of the things that we take for granted and do just by mere that is all the unconscious that's doing that. And the conscious mind is, we tend to think that we know more than we actually do. And the self, though, is combining both of those. That's the self. That's how we consider ourselves. And then the dynamic between ego and self involves a kind of tension. And you might have recognized this in your own life. There's this tension there always. So if the ego, dominates you, then the individual you become disconnected from a deeper wisdom. If your ego takes over, you won't have the same access to your unconscious wisdom and to the wisdom of God, essentially, or of the beyond. And that's not to say that you are God, but we do have wisdom that we can kind of strip back to get to. And in order to do that, we have to bloom beyond the ego. And that's a practice, and that takes a lot of humbling. That's why the scripture talk a lot about being humble, and that pride is actually the greatest sin, so to speak. That pride is what oftentimes gets us in between, or that stops us from accessing that truth, that wisdom, because we think that we know it all when we don't know it all. Now, on the other hand, though, if the self overwhelms the ego, then it risks psychic fragmentation, and that is psychosis, essentially. So you'd just be overwhelmed by, let's say, the 90% of your mind just taking over. You'd go completely nuts, essentially. You would seriously have big trouble, and you'd not be able to discern anything. And so that is also not optimal. And religious experiences, especially what we'll get to soon, called numinous experiences or mystical experiences, they often kind of reflect a confrontation or integration of the ego and the self, guiding individuals towards a sense of unity. So these mystical experiences, religious experiences, can help to unify these two so that we have greater harmony in our lives and experience that on the day-to-day. That's the purpose, I guess, for having these experiences, and why these experiences are sometimes also called, graceful, passivity. They happen to you, beyond you. It's not an achievement, it's something that's just happening. And then the other terms would be conscious and unconscious. We've already talked a little bit about it, but consciousness is the realm of deliberate thought and awareness, while the unconscious includes, again, personal memories, suppressed emotions, and archetypal elements. So memories, what we have learned, suppressed emotions that we've kind of like just put aside because we couldn't deal with them at some point in our lives, or didn't want to, or it was too tough to. And the archetypal elements that we all tend to have and operate by, and that they find a way to express themselves nonetheless, no matter whether we're religious or not, actually. And then Jung highlighted the importance of engaging with the unconscious through practices like daydreaming or dream analysis and active imagination to access these hidden truths. And certainly there's a time and a place for that. And there's a time and a place to get closer to and observe our minds more in certain seasons, to really be exploring them, and to when you first wake up, the first thing you do is write down what's been on your mind throughout the night, because a lot of the times unconscious things that might have come up during that time. And typically, just a fun fact here between the conscious and the unconscious is that the unconscious, you'll get more in touch with that naturally just before you go to sleep and just before you wake up, essentially. During that time, your brain is in something called alpha and theta brainwave state, especially the theta one. It's the same state that you also go into when you're in hypnosis, and hypnotherapy is based on this fact that brings people into this state to access these truths, this wisdom that's there, that goes beyond the conscious mind, where you don't judge your thoughts as harshly, but rather just be and just unravel, if that makes sense. So I hope that clarifies the conscious unconscious a little bit. The unconscious can manifest through, again, symbols, through dreams, through religious imagery, offering pathways really to healing and to growth. Yes. And then you have the collective unconscious. So beyond the personal unconscious or subconscious that you might have, unconscious, subconscious tend to be used kind of like interchangeably. But beyond the personal unconscious, Jung proposed a collective unconscious. And this is sort of like a shared, you can call it like a database, a shared space in the psyche, layer of the psyche that contains universal patterns and symbols and archetypes that we all share, and which is the base from which, let's say, synchronistic experiences tend to then be explained by, because we all share these things. And so there's sometimes overlap happening that's kind of, synchronistic, and that allows us to have, telepathy, and be able to be able to have prophecy and prophetic dreams, and all of these phenomena can be explained by the collective unconscious that we tend to have. And why do we have this? Well, it's because we have inherited from humanity's shared evolutionary and cultural history this kind of database, sort of, over the ancient, millennia of time that we have existed. And also, you might say that this is like a gift from God. This is God, essentially, that we all have access to. So some might say God, some might say that it's the unconscious, subconscious. I honestly think that God is different than the unconscious and subconscious, but that we're gifted with a subconscious and unconscious to be able to access God, to be able to to get revelations from God. Okay? So that's that. Then you have individuation. What is individuation? Individuation is a lifelong process, honestly. And it's the process of integrating the conscious and unconscious to become one's authentic self. To become, in, the Christian way of explaining it, it would be to really be more like Jesus, be more like Christ. That you wouldn't be him, but you would obviously mix it with your unique gifts and talents and the way that you are, but you'd become more loving, more kind, more patient, you'd have more self-discipline, self-control. You'd be more of your authentic self, and your authentic self would shine more through those spiritual kind of harvests or fruits, let's say. So the spiritual fruit would grow through your individuation process. Does that make sense? As you individuate, those fruits would start to grow more and more and more and more. And it involves reconciling opposites, right? Individuation. So ego versus self would be kind of individuated and reconciled. The persona, that is the social mask. And I know, like, when I studied throughout my spiritual journey, I studied a little bit of astrology, I think it was. And in that, you have the different planets, right? The sun and the moon and the ascendant. And the ascendant is the persona, essentially how you portray yourself to others. So it kind of like makes me think of that when I say that right now. We all have a social mask, a persona, and a shadow with hidden or suppressed aspects of the self, and these would then be reconciled together so you'd be more authentic, essentially, right? And then also the masculine and feminine, the anima and the animus dynamics would also be reconciled so that you'd be able to have like that integrative, place where you know when to lean into your more feminine and when to lean more into your masculine, in a sense that those are like calibrated, and have that be like a whole, so that when coming together with another partner, for instance, or coming together with other people, you wouldn't be leaning in one or the other. You'd have that integrated sense of reconciliation within you, which also the scriptures are about. They're about reconciling the opposites, the contrasts of right and wrong, the contrast between life and death, between all of these topics that you'll see and the themes in scripture. And religion and spirituality, you see, are often integral to individuation, providing frameworks for grappling with existential questions or connecting with the transcendent. So that is really what's so supportive about it. And then also I have one more, and that is symbols and archetypes. Symbols, what's that? And archetypes, what's that? Symbols, they act as, think of it like bridges between realms. Symbols communicate with the vision, they communicate with the unconscious and the subconscious. The subconscious is able to pick apart and discern more. Not actually discern, it's able to read through images in a way that the conscious mind cannot. The conscious mind might judge things, judge symbols, but even though that you might be judging symbols, the symbols themselves will speak to a deeper part of you, a deeper place in you. When you move through the individuation process, the symbols will start to speak to you more strongly, so that they will impact your heart differently than what they would if you were just operating from the ego. Does that make sense? And symbols encapsulate profound truths that are otherwise inexpressible. So mere words couldn't explain it. Just like the painting Vincent van Gogh's sunflowers. Why do these sunflowers resonate with people? Why is it that art draws people in to have people look at canvases? You know, why is it that people are moving into cathedrals and churches and they're just like, there's a certain atmosphere there? Why is it that icons tend to like evoke something in you? This is because they encapsulate symbols and profound truths to them. And religious symbols like the cross, I remember in New Age I was like into the mandala and all of that, often reflects archetypal themes of transformation, of suffering, and of redemption, of universal themes that we all will move through and that can help us to navigate this earthly experience that we call life. Archetypes is related in a sense because archetypes are universal patterns influencing behavior and perception. And key examples here, just think of even in a movie, you'll have the hero. Here, the hero embodies transformation and courage. And I can see this even in my own life, how it's literally been like a hero's journey the past decade, where I'd left my home to go around the world, to, you know, lose myself, to find myself, to lose myself, to find myself, to eventually, you know, come back home with a lot of wisdom and having met a lot of mentors, had a lot of coaches, had a lot of, you know, people speaking into my life or having spoken into my life, and then coming back to want to contribute with what it is that I have uncovered as far as revelations and truth. And that's form of like the hero's journey, and it comes with a lot of sacrifice, comes with a lot of suffering. It literally looks like, you know, putting the cross on and carrying your cross, like it says in the Bible. It says, put on, you know, carry your cross and follow me, Jesus says. What does that look like? I think it looks like going on the hero's journey, to listen to those nudges and those calls, and to, again, engage with God through the unconscious and let that form us in our individuation across time. There's also some other archetypes like the wise old man, the wise woman. It represents guidance and insight. The great mother, for instance, she symbolizes nurturing and destruction. And also you have the shadow, which represents suppressed aspects of the psyche that must be integrated for wholeness. So you see there's a lot of different symbols there. Even, you know, Mary Magdalene, and as, you know, the feminine, and how she just like has such love for Jesus and have such devotion to Jesus and is able to like walk along with all the other disciples and have such strength and such, you know, fierceness, but at the same time such gentleness and such openness to God and to the divine, and to be moved by that and being so secure in that. There's something there that really like resonates with my heart anyways, and it's Jesus that I keep my eyes on, you know? But I think that Jung here viewed religion as a necessary and powerful way to connect with archetypal realities and foster individuation. So symbols, rituals, and myths, he believed, enabled individuals to access and to integrate unconscious content and promoting psychological balance in a sense. And you see this and you hear this even from psychologists in this modern world, which, for instance, you could say Jordan Peterson really aims to like bring this up to the collective consciousness too, that there's something about our pull and psychological pull and yearning for these things. To have proper individuation, we need to have God at the center. We need to have like something in the ground that we all kind of are united around, and that That is how our psyche actually works. It needs a center point in which to function from. And if it doesn't have that, it will come up with something else than what originally was the plan and the purpose all along, and how we were created and what we were created to have at the center. I believe after a lot of exploration, a lot of back and forth, I believe now is God, is Christ at the center of our lives. So now I'll go into the second section, which is explaining revelatory experiences that are revelations, and how this can be both an expression of psychopathology, but could also be a form of transformational intuitive insight. So what's a revelatory experience? A revelatory experience, or those kinds of experiences, they are moments. They're moments of profound insight and truth. And they could be insights, they could be voices or visions or knowings. They could have all of those, and they appear to originate from beyond the self, from beyond you. It's not something that you come up with. It's not rooted in your feelings necessarily. It's a revelation. And these experiences can be extremely transformative, and I can testify to this myself, that these experiences can really shatter what is not meant to be in your life, and can really shatter foundations, or really highlight foundations that were not founded on the truth, that would eventually fall. And so you'd have revelations that would prepare you to think differently, act differently, behave differently, even look differently, carry yourself differently. Revelations that shape you, that mature you. But that's not the end all be all. It could also be callings, etc. And I'll get into that. But they could very often offer life direction and spiritual insight or creative breakthroughs. So it's a form of guidance, and how I'd explain it is literally like the hand of God, just like holding me and giving me a nudge in a certain direction, or give me a revelation about something that's to be changed or to be carried on with. The key characteristics of this, as I said, would be voices, visions, and epiphanies. So you'd have visions, externalized auditory experiences, voices. Did I say visions or voices now? Anyhow, I'll just carry on with voices. Voices are externalized auditory experiences, often carrying authority and offering guidance. An example here would be St. Paul hearing Jesus' voice, and I certainly can say that I've had auditory, experiences like this as well. And I wouldn't necessarily say that it's an external, like I can hear the voice of someone like it would be the voice of a person, but it's more of, to me, how it is it's a consistent and persistent whisper that's discerned from my voice or anyone else's voice, and it won't stop until you it will have a peace about it, okay? It will have a peace about it and bring about peace. And it's different. And it takes time to discern God's voice, to discern the beyond's voice. But that's one of the ways that you can have that kind of experience. And then you have visions. So that could be vivid imagery or symbols perceived as external or deeply internal, often laden with spiritual or existential significance. So these visions, it's also called clairvoyance to a certain sense, or you could also call it prophetic vision in the more Christian sense. You'd call it prophecy, and you'd have visions of your own life, someone else's life, or the collective's, way of living. And it could be visions about anything whatsoever. I can just boil this down to just like very simply, I have visions, I work with visions as a photographer. I always, are moved by something greater than myself when I engage in photography. I don't sit around thinking with my conscious mind what I'm going to take photos of. I typically get a vision and I just act on it. I get a vision and act on it. I set up the scene to do that, and I go to that tree over there, and I go to that little place over there. We drive, and I just intuitively just know here we're gonna capture moments here. You see what I mean? I get nudged in certain directions. So these could be, they're not necessarily revelatory experiences, what I'm describing now, but they're still visions. Revelatory visions would carry profound, profoundness to it that can move you even into tears. You could also have epiphanies, right? That are sudden intuitive realizations that bring clarity to very complex problems or life purpose. When you stand in like a crossroad, who do you go to? Do you go to your parents? Do you go to your partner? Do you go to your friends? Do you go to your pastor? Do you go to a spiritual leader or a coach? Or are you able to access that truth, the answer, through connection with the divine, connection with God, and receive the epiphany there? That oftentimes takes patience, persistence, prayer, leaning in, and sitting with questions a while to get the epiphany, in a sense. Now, what if there's a psychopathological side to these revelatory experiences? That's important to consider, because that is absolutely the case. And pathological features of revelatory experiences could occur, for instance, in schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and dissociative disorders. And some examples there would be religious delusion, like hearing God commanding acts that would be harmful to people, persistent hallucinations that cause distress or dysfunction. And honestly, I've heard several accounts and testimonies of people that have engaged in and with the demonic, literally, or had experiences of hallucinations because they've been involved in the darkness of spirituality, which there's absolutely that side to spirituality too, and a lot of the New Age practices can induce these things. I've definitely heard and been witness to, and I know people that have been involved in, let's say, Kundalini yoga or tantric yoga, that have ended up having these exact symptoms of religious delusions, persistent hallucinations, and extreme psychological distress. And you might be wondering, what is it that happens in the brain during this? There's some neurological correlates here. Frontal lobe, that's this one. Frontal lobe, that, with the prefrontal lobe, is the one that, discerns and is able to say right and wrong and good and bad, and that decides, really, And this one is suppressed. So reduced self-monitoring. You don't monitor yourself as much, essentially. And I think that in general, honestly, when I think of my spiritual evolution, there was a time where that was absolutely the case. And I think now I'm kind of back to maturing that, to monitor myself in certain circumstances. But at the same time though, there's always something that wants to come through, and I don't monitor too much. So I do think that there's something there about when you mature in your spiritual sacred walk, you don't monitor yourself to an extreme amount. You're more authentic, right? truth comes through you, wisdom comes through you, and you just share. But anyways, if this is totally suppressed, you can go into delusions. And you could also have this funny word, thalamic activity linking sensory perception with belief systems. Okay, thalamic activity linking sensory perception with belief systems. I'm not quite sure what that means, but I do think that it has to do with our senses and that it can influence the way that we believe. Like our senses get overwhelmed essentially, and like we just lose track of who we are even and what we believe and all of that. There's some other indicators of pathology, and that is, you want to be aware of this if you engage in this on the spiritual sacred path. If you have frequent, distressing, or uncontrollable experiences that are happening like a lot, or a loss of self-agency with delusions dominating perception, for instance, where you don't feel like you are a self anymore, where you lose that self-agency and the ability to be an agent over yourself, where if you feel like something or someone or whatever takes you over, this could be a sign of pathology. Another one is paranoia or persecutory themes. So believe in divine punishment, or that someone's after you, or that you're persecuted by God or something like that, or that you're like a crucified self that deserve to be punished. That is also a sign of pathology, or paranoia about what someone think of you, or if you walk out the door and you think that you know what everyone else around you are thinking. These are signs that you want to be hyper aware of. And I do know that if you were exploring New Age spirituality disciplines like numerology and astrology and just a lot of different tools, especially numerology, then you'll be hyper aware of like numbers, for instance, and of just people around you and the signals that they send you. And this can oftentimes, I'm not saying oftentimes, but sometimes you want to be aware that this can cause eventual paranoia, because you could be paranoid at some point about people's intentions towards you and what things mean in your life. Further on, I want to touch on expression of transrational intuitive insight. So now that we've talked about revelatory experiences, key characteristics of those, and expression of psychopathology, let's move into the way that you can recognize that you might have a transrational intuitive insight. For instance, creative breakthrough, vocational clarity, or spiritual insight could be some of what you could experience. So it's such a beautiful sky outside. It's like pink. It's beautiful, and it's still raining. I wish you could see this, but here I am. Creative breakthroughs. Revelatory experiences could often occur during states of heightened intuition. And with that, I mean, if you're contemplating deeply, if you're meditating deeply, if you are in a state of intuitive insight, if you've been fasting for a while, or if you've practiced something that's put you in contact with that intuitive sense of being that takes over when your rational mind is kind of like suppressed a little bit, then the intuition takes over and you can have a creative breakthrough there, enabling creative problem solving and inspiration. And here you obviously have Jung's imagination technique, and it kind of involves that you are engaging your imagination essentially. And an example here would be Newton's discovery of gravity, or any artist's flash of inspiration. And I think there's something to that. I certainly can testify to that I've had plenty of creative breakthroughs during times of transrational intuitive insight. Vocational clarity as well. If you're wondering about, your purpose, your calling, what you're here for, the deeper questions, the existential questions, often when you have these transrational intuitive insights, you can come closer to the truth of what is blatantly just distraction in your life to what is actually real. And that can highlight your calling and your gifts more. You're able to see yourself maybe more clearly, other people more clearly, and how you can be of service in this world. Ultimately, I truly believe that we all have purpose in God, but I truly believe we all have purpose in God, but that we all have an individual calling. Absolutely. And these callings can shift and change as we go on our journeys. But these experiences can inspire life-changing decisions leading to greater purpose and motivation. I personally engaged in a 4-day fast before I decided to move to Oslo to study clinical psychology and continue on with my entrepreneurial projects, with putting together the garden gatherings, and all of the things that's inside of the garden. Focusing on building community and trusting that this would be the path. Also calling in my husband, calling in the things that I believe, after having explored a lot over the past decades, that would be aligned to the gifts that I have been given by God. And you know, things are like being pieced together by God's hand. It's beautiful to be part of and witness. Then lastly, spiritual insight is another form of revelatory experience. So revelatory experience often aligned with transformative spiritual growth, offering clarity on life's meaning and a connection to the divine. And if you want to distinguish pathology from insight here, pathological revelations, they're frequent, they're distressing, they leave you with anxiety, they impair your daily functioning, they're tied to delusions. And on the other hand, though, you have intuitive insights that are rare, meaningful, enhancing well-being, and they promote your creativity, your wholehearted love, your engagement with the world. It causes you to flourish and to ultimately have a greater experience of this life and to contribute beyond yourself. So that's the second part of this journey. Now let's move on to the third part. I'm just gonna grab some tea. All right, so the third section will help you better understand the different aspects related to that of synchronicity, how synchronicity can be explained, and how it relates to Jung's theories. And I can hands on heart say that I've been through the seasons of synchronicity, and I certainly still can experience synchronicity. But there was a time for sure, I believe, when I was in my journey of blooming beyond perfectionism, after having come out of like the material world, or gone beyond that and seen that that is not as fulfilling as it promised, to go on my spiritual journey. And on that journey, as I traveled the world, I've experienced so many synchronicities. I wish I wrote them all down, but literally, hands on heart, it's been touching to see and to feel and to know God in such a personal way. See how he's like, you know, put his hand on my shoulder through these different synchronistic experiences and enabled me to keep going, to keep moving, to keep seeking. I think synchronicities to me would be gentle nudges from God to nudge you in seeking God. So it seems to be that synchronicity very often are part more of the spiritual journey than the religious experience. Because in the religious experience, you've come to terms with God, you know God, and it's not this like constant looking around trying to figure out things. At least that's how I describe it. So just a definition of what that is. This is coined by Carl Jung And synchronicity refers to the perception of meaningful coincidences that lack a causal relationship but are subjectively significant. Beautiful. So the key characteristics of this is that it holds a meaningful coincidence. It is a meaningful coincidence. It holds intuitive recognition, and it holds transformative significance. So first, a meaningful coincidence, other people that don't have these experiences might think that these are just these are just coincidences that are random, and that doesn't hold any meaning at all. But to you and your experience, they are deeply meaningful, and you perceive it to be a meaningful coincidence, a synchronicity. So these are events, these are happenings, I would say, that feel interconnected to something beyond yourself, often as part of a divine plan or a cosmic plan or, a sacred plan beyond you, where you're like, your jaw sometimes just drops. You're like, how did this even happen? I can't explain this. Again, it's inevitable. And also intuitive recognition. So the meaning is felt intuitively. It's like in the heart space. And there's plenty of research that shows that our heart holds a tremendous, huge, big electromagnetic field that goes way beyond us, that goes way beyond this body. And I think that there's something there about the synchronicities sometimes unfolding from the heart space, that our heart holds a desire, that's God's desire, and when it's purified, it literally draws that in, and you experience a synchronistic event that's like a nudge from God, like, yes, this direction over here, this direction over here. But we want to take these with discernment. That is extremely important. So the meaning is felt intuitively rather than deducted logically. It's not something that you can just think about through logic. And it's transcendental. So often it's interpreted as messages from the unconscious or divine forces like God. So it's a way to help you in your individuation process and help you in your process of discovery of the sacred. Some examples of synchronicity would be thinking of a friend just moments before a call or before they call, a dream symbolically foreshadowing a real life event. It could be repeated encounters with specific numbers, words, or symbols that feel meaningful. I've certainly experienced this myself. And those are just some examples. I have plenty. But those are just examples. Let's now talk about the psychological and neurological mechanisms behind this. How can this be explained, if it can at all? Well, we have pattern recognition, we have neurobiology and cognitive biases we want to touch on. And it's important to touch on this so that we don't just blindly follow everything that just keeps happening around us. So first, pattern recognition. Synchronicity arises from a deeper place, right? From the human's tendency to seek patterns. That is one way that it could be explained, that we tend to want to look for and seek patterns in our lives, to have a sense of coherence, to have a story, to not just be a cloud. Yeah? And this is called apophenia. Apophenia. That looks for that. And we also have something in the brain called the RAS, the reticular activating system, that looks for something that it's previously been, exposed for. So if you've been exposed for something, you'll start looking for that thing. If you've been exposed for a white Tesla, you'll start looking, and they will become more apparent in your awareness as you go about your day. So that's a psychological understanding of synchronicity, and there could be something there too, but there could also be a spiritual aspect to it. And then you have signal detection theory that says that differentiating meaningful patterns from random noise. Signal detection theory. So because we are we're just overwhelmed by a lot of info, a lot of data, we have this signal detection theory to differentiate what's meaningful to pay attention to and what's not meaningful to pay attention to. The neurobiology of synchronicity is also super interesting because dopamine activity actually enhances pattern recognition, but can lead to excessive connections and psychosis. So when you see a meaningful pattern, you'll be rewarded with dopamine by the brain to start continuing to look for that pattern. And if you are, very engaged in that, then at some point that could lead to a sense of psychosis. And I know for sure if you're into tarot readings or if you're into, numerology, be careful to not over consume on these things and over depend on them, because honestly, I have made some very poor decisions in my life from following mere synchronicity because I think I was overwhelmed by dopamine just like constantly going off as I began to see patterns, and then just like completely losing track of morals, ethics, and a sense of groundedness and rationality as well. We need to balance those out. Also in neurobiology, the brain, the emotional brain regions, the limbic system actually amplified the perceived significance of coincidences. So the limbic system can be more active because of the coincidences. And then we also have some cognitive biases here. So humans are naturally predisposed to ascribe meaning to ambiguous stimuli, often influenced by expectations and beliefs. So if you have a certain belief, you might be influenced by that belief. If you tend to think that this is your husband, this is your person, this is it, and then you begin to filter every single meaningful coincidence through that lens, now you make yourself your own God, because you tend to think that you know it all. You think you know the outcome, you think you're attached to the circumstance, you're attached to how things are going to unfold, and you will start nuancing out those other types of information that might be coming to you that goes in complete opposite direction of what you originally, believed. But you filter those out and don't pay attention to them because of the synchronicities that you are addicted to by dopamine. So I need you to be careful here. I really just want to invite you to be careful here, because we're still here to be as conscious as possible and to remain with discernment. And that's just a blatant fact. So how could you discern between, let's say, pathological and non-pathological synchronicity? Well, when it comes to the pathological form of synchronicity, you would be paranoid, essentially. You would be perceiving malevolent intent in unrelated events. So you would be having a heightened sense of awareness where you'd be extremely scared almost and distressed for things unfolding a certain way. So that is something to be aware of if you're moving into the more paranoid way of having that experience. Psychosis is another one. So loss of ability, again, to distinguish between internal and external reality. Psychosis is when the conscious mind is being overwhelmed with the unconscious impressions, which again, when you're engaging with synchronicity, which is part of the spiritual experience, then it's important to also remain focused on practices that can help ground you, that can help to keep you here, that can help to process what you're going through, what revelations you have, the synchronicities you have. It helps to write about these things. It helps to talk about these things. It helps to have conversations about the experience that you have, because that keeps you here, that keeps you grounded, and it doesn't take you up there. Do you know what I mean? Yes. So that would be the pathological synchronicity. The non-pathological synchronicity, of course, would foster creativity, it would foster your spiritual sacred growth, it would give you a sense of awe. That's something that a lot of people tend to describe when they have synchronicity. Like, they're just in awe of nature, of God's creation, and of how, you know, the beyond works in their lives. And also, it could encourage reflection on one's life narrative and enhancing meaning making, so that what would be dry and what would be boring and what would be something that you would just ignore or blatantly just find uninteresting about life, suddenly through synchronicity, you begin to see that there's not just coincidences to this life. In fact, there might be a pattern here. There might be a reason for things happening. There might be a connection between the dots, like Albert Einstein kept talking about. He was promoting imagination. He was promoting all of that. And you hear this from artists as well, that they would obviously be led by something greater beyond themselves in creating what they created. Because maybe it wasn't them who created it, but they were willing vessels for creation to come through them. I also want to lastly touch a little bit here on synchronicity and Jung's theories and significance and impact of synchronicity. So, archetypal influence, the transcendent function, and unus mundus we'll talk on. Synchronicity reflects the activity of archetypes in the collective unconscious, manifesting as a symbolic pattern in external events. So an example here would, for instance, be a recurring symbol like the mandala appearing in both dreams and external life that signals individuation. For me, I could say that, for instance, the cross has been speaking to me for a long time now, several years, and the meaning of it is being uncovered more and more and more, and the depth of it is just carrying me into deeper realms, honestly, that makes me a better person. Honestly, I really think so. I think it makes me a more generous person. I think it makes me a person that doesn't look for what I will get in something, but rather looks at what I can give. And there's something there about the archetype of Jesus that, even though that I don't just see him as an archetype, I see him as an actual person that lived, and I see him as my savior and the one that saved me from myself. I do think that if there were to be any archetype at all that would be the most transformative to have in your life, a role model, it would be Jesus. And what he did for you and me to live and have life. It's just something that can't be put into words unless you are deeply committed to uncover the true meaning of Jesus, the true meaning of him, of God. So that's essential. The transcendent function, there's a transcendent function also to synchronicity. So again, synchronicity can act as a transcendent function, bridging the unconscious and the conscious material and fostering thus a integration between these, and give you a sense of growth in your life and in your psychic, not psychic, but your psychology and your psychological well-being, and that also trickles down to your everyday life. There's this term called unus mundus, a very funny term. Jung viewed synchronicity as evidence of unified reality, unus mundus, where psyche and matter are interconnected. So unus mundus means interconnected reality, and that is what we open ourselves up to when we're engaging in synchronicity, which again, it can't be performed. Synchronicity is not something you can do and write down on a list. I'm gonna have a synchronistic experience today. No, it is something you are open to experience potentially, but that is passive passivity, right? It's a passivity experience that happens to you. And also, what's the significance and impact here of synchronicity? Many impacts, but synchronicity experiences evoke a sense of wonder, a sense of purpose, a sense of aliveness and connection and meaning to God, the universe, the beyond, whatever, wherever you are at in your spiritual sacred journey. It connects you to something deeper. And they also foster meaning making, linking inner psychological states of what you're experiencing to outer events in ways that align with spiritual and existential themes. And I think that if you are in this place where you experience this, you're definitely moving along, because now you don't just live in your own head, in your material life. You don't just view things as like flesh and blood, let's say, or people like that, but you begin to see that there's a connection between you, the environment around you, the people around you, and that you have a deeply meaningful purpose in being here. And I believe that that purpose is God. Yeah, glory to God. As we conclude now, I just invite you to really consider your own experiences with mystical states and spirituality and mysticism. And I want to ask you, comment below. Have you encountered moments that felt deeply moving, that felt transformative, that felt transcendent, that you can't forget about, that changed you, or that potentially have the capacity to change you if you sit with it a little bit? And I want to ask you, what insights did these experiences provide you with? How did it mold you and shape you? And in the garden community, we really embrace these diverse experiences, and I really like to foster a place to connect, to first and foremost contemplate before that, and then eventually to contribute, to be able to create. And as you now can tell from this journey we've been on here, creativity is such a fundamental outcome of having these different revelatory experiences, synchronicity experiences. And the more that we have of those, the more creative we can be, and vice versa. They are interconnected with one another. And I know that creativity has been such a beautiful tool to connect with the beyond, with God in my life. And I fundamentally believe that that is what we're here for, to be conscious creators in the image and the likeness of God, and to connect with one another and contribute beyond ourselves. There's such meaning to be found in just that. So you're welcome to join in to explore the spiritual and the sacred, and to, just go on this journey with me. And if you're looking for this supportive community to share your experiences and where you're at in your journey, then you can check out the garden in the link below, and you can find more information about all of that there. And I hope to see you in there to contemplate, to connect, and to contribute together. And I pray revelatory experiences over you. I pray synchronistic experiences over you. I pray that you would have a deeper sense of awareness of the reality and that which is beyond it.